My name is Renee Callahan, I'm 34, and that night I actually believed my mother had softened. We were at the Hillcrest Country Club in Bethesda, Maryland, celebrating my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and for the first time in almost a year, I let myself relax at a family event. I had a glass of sparkling water in my hand instead of wine, because Cole and I were 3 weeks out from our second embryo transfer failing, and I still wasn't ready to drink. I was wrong to relax. I was wrong to think that room was safe. The banquet hall smelled like gardenias and warm bread, a smell I will never be able to separate from what happened next. My mother, Diane Whitfield, stood at the head table in a champagne-colored dress, tapping her fork against her glass to quiet the room of 60-some guests. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked my father, Walter, for 40 years of marriage. Then she turned, glass still in hand, and looked directly at me. "And I just want to say," she said, her voice carrying clean across the microphone she didn't need, "that family is everything. Real family. Not the kind you have to buy in a clinic." The room made a sound I can only describe as a held breath. Somewhere near the dessert table, a fork clinked against a plate and stopped. My Aunt Carol's mouth opened slightly. My sister Jenna, sitting 2 tables over with her toddler on her lap, went still in a way I'd never seen her go still before. I felt my face go hot, then cold, then numb, in that order, like a wave breaking and receding. Cole's hand found mine under the table before I even registered he'd moved. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I could feel his pulse in his palm, faster than mine. My mother kept talking, something about grandchildren and legacy, but I stopped hearing individual words. I was watching 60 faces try to decide whether to look at me or look away, and most of them chose to look away, which somehow hurt more than if they'd stared. Jenna's husband, Marcus, actually did stare, not unkindly, just with the frozen expression of a man watching a car accident he can't stop. Cole leaned in and said, low enough that only I could hear it, "We're leaving in 5 minutes. Just breathe until then. Before I tell you what happened in the parking lot that night, and before I tell you what Cole had already been quietly saving on his phone for the past 4 months without telling me, 17 voicemails, though I didn't know the number yet, tell me, what time is it where you're watching this from? Where are you watching from tonight? What's the weather like there right now?" I'm always curious how far these stories end up traveling, so if you don't mind, drop it in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to the country club. We didn't leave in 5 minutes. We left in 11, because my father caught my arm at the coat check and said, "She didn't mean it like that, Renee, you know how she gets," which was somehow worse than the toast itself, because it told me this wasn't new information to him. It told me he'd heard some version of that sentence from her before, in private, and had decided it was survivable. In the car, Cole didn't start the engine right away. He sat with both hands on the wheel, staring at the valet stand, and I watched his jaw work the way it did when he was choosing his words instead of just saying the first ones that came. "I've been recording her," he said finally. I didn't understand him at first. I thought he meant that night, on his phone, like people do at parties. "Not tonight," he said. "For a while now. Every time she calls me instead of you. Every time she leaves a voicemail trying to get me to talk you into stopping the IVF, or trying to get me to agree that you're," and I'm quoting her, "punishing the family by not adopting instead." I sat in the passenger seat of our Honda Pilot in a country club parking lot in a dress I'd bought specifically for that night, and I felt something shift under my ribs, something that had been braced for months finally cracking open. "How many?" I said. It wasn't really a question. 17, he said. "I have 17 saved." I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because this isn't a story where I felt righteous and clear right away. I felt betrayed twice, once by my mother, standing under a chandelier in front of everyone I'd grown up around, and once by my husband, who had known something this large for months and hadn't told me. I did not have a clean answer for how I felt about that second part. I still don't, if I'm being honest with you now. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Because you were barely getting through the days after the transfer failed, he said. And I didn't want to hand you one more thing to carry until I understood how bad it actually was. I looked out the window at the valet stand, at a young man in a red vest jogging to retrieve someone's Lexus, at the ordinary machinery of a night continuing for everyone who hadn't just watched their mother turn a room against them. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Jenna, "Call me when you can." That was not okay. I didn't call her that night. I sat in the car with Cole, and I asked him to play me the first voicemail, right there in the parking lot, engine still off, gardenia smell still clinging to my dress from the centerpieces I'd walked past on my way out. He hesitated. "Are you sure?" I was not sure. But I nodded anyway, because some part of me already understood that whatever was in those 17 messages was going to explain a lot more than one bad toast at one anniversary party, and that if I didn't listen now, I was going to spend the next however many months wondering. He pulled up his voicemail app. The screen lit up the inside of the car, and I saw the list, dates going back to March, 5 months of them, more than one from the same week sometimes. He tapped the oldest one. My mother's voice filled the car, calm and reasonable in a way that somehow made it worse. "Cole, honey, it's Diane. I just think someone needs to talk sense into her before she spends another $30,000 on a doctor's fantasy. You have options. Real options. Call me back." We sat in that parking lot until almost 11, playing message after message. Cole didn't skip any of them, even when I flinched. I think he decided somewhere in those 5 months that the only way through this was for me to hear it all at once, in his voice, not hers. The second voicemail was dated April 9th. In it, my mother suggested Cole and I look into a specific adoption agency in Rockville that a woman from her book club had used, and she said, verbatim, "It's cheaper, it's faster, and frankly, Renee's body has already told you what it thinks about this." The fifth voicemail, from May, was the one where she offered to pay for a consultation with a real specialist, not my actual reproductive endocrinologist, Dr. Anisa Patel at Shady Grove Fertility, who I'd been seeing for 2 years, but a friend of hers who did, in Diane's words, holistic hormone balancing out of a strip mall in Gaithersburg. By the time we got home to our townhouse in Silver Spring, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. This wasn't a woman who occasionally said the wrong thing. This was a campaign, run quietly, for 5 months, aimed at my husband because she'd correctly calculated that going through him gave her deniability with me. To understand how we got to that parking lot, I have to take you back further than March. My mother and I have never been close in the way some mothers and daughters are. Growing up in Chevy Chase, I was the middle child between Jenna, who did everything right and early, married at 26, pregnant at 27, and my younger brother, Trevor, who my mother has never once criticized in his life, even the year he dropped out of community college twice. I was the one who took longer. Longer to find a career, landing eventually as a project manager at a healthcare logistics firm. Longer to get married. Cole and I didn't marry until I was 31. And now, longer to have a child, which in my mother's mental ledger apparently counted against me the same way the other delays had. There's a specific memory I keep coming back to. I was 9 years old, and I'd lost a spelling bee at Rosemary Hills Elementary, misspelled necessary, 1C instead of 2. My mother didn't console me in the car. She said, "Well, Jenna would have gotten that one." She wasn't being cruel on purpose, I don't think. It was just how she measured things, out loud, without seeming to notice she was doing it. Jenna became the yardstick I got held against for the next 25 years, and infertility just became the newest ruler. My father, Walter, was a different kind of problem. He wasn't cruel. He was absent in the specific way that lets cruelty happen unchallenged. He ran a small commercial insurance brokerage for 32 years, and his solution to any conflict between my mother and anyone else was to leave the room. "Let it blow over" was something I heard him say more times than I can count. He said it about the spelling bee comment. He said it about the time my mother told my college boyfriend, in front of me, that she'd always pictured Renee with someone more ambitious. He said it in the coat check line at the country club, 40 years into a marriage built on him never once making my mother sit with the consequences of what she said. Cole came into this family in 2019, 3 years before we married, and I watched him try, genuinely try, to build something with my mother. He complimented her garden. He remembered her friends' names. For the first year, she seemed to like him more, I sometimes suspected, than she liked me. That changed the moment we told her, in January of last year, that we'd started IVF after 18 months of trying naturally and one early miscarriage at 9 weeks that we'd told almost no one about. Her first reaction, over lunch at a cheesecake factory in Bethesda Row, was to ask how much it cost. When I told her roughly $22,000 for the first round, out of pocket, since our insurance covered diagnostics but not treatment, she set down her fork and said, "That's a down payment on a house, Renee." Not, "I'm sorry you're going through this." Not, "How are you feeling?" A number, compared to a different number. My sister Jenna, to her credit, wasn't part of the campaign. She'd tell me later that she suspected something was going on with Mom and Cole talking behind the scenes, because our mother had made a comment to her in June about how Cole's finally starting to see reason, but Jenna said she assumed it was about something unrelated, maybe a house purchase, and didn't press it. I don't blame Jenna for not connecting the dots sooner. None of us were built to expect our mother would run a 5-month whisper campaign against her own daughter's marriage. The first embryo transfer, in February, failed. The second, the one 3 weeks before the anniversary party, failed too. Both times, my mother's response wasn't comfort. It was, "Maybe this is your body telling you something," a line she apparently liked enough to use twice, once to my face in March, and once, we now knew, to Cole in a voicemail in May. What I didn't know, sitting in my kitchen at 11:40 that night listening to voicemail 11 of 17, was that my mother had also been talking to a fourth person. Not just Cole. Not just occasionally to me. She'd been talking to Trevor's wife, Priya, about staging an intervention before we spent more money on what she called, in voicemail 13, a lost cause dressed up as hope. I didn't know that yet. That came 10 days later, in a phone call I never expected, from Priya herself. 10 days after the anniversary party, on a Tuesday evening, Priya called me directly. I almost didn't pick up. Trevor's wife and I were friendly but not close, the kind of in-laws who text on birthdays and not much else. But something told me to answer. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to know I've been sick about it for weeks." She told me that in early June, my mother had called her and asked her to help get everyone on the same page before the anniversary party, because Diane wanted to use the event to finally say what needed saying in front of the family, since private conversations with me and Cole weren't landing. Priya said she'd told my mother she wanted no part of it, and that she'd assumed Diane would drop it. She hadn't. 2 weeks before the party, my mother texted Priya a draft of what she planned to say in her toast, not verbatim what came out of her mouth that night, but close enough that Priya recognized it instantly when I described the moment to her. Priya forwarded me the screenshots. I sat at my kitchen table and read my mother's own handwriting, typed into a text message, workshopping the phrase "buy in a clinic" against an earlier draft that said "manufacture in a lab," like she was testing which one would land harder in a room full of people. That was the moment the shape of this changed for me. A comment said in anger, even a cruel one, is a different kind of wound than a line rehearsed and revised 2 weeks in advance for maximum impact in front of 60 witnesses. The same week, a second piece landed. My father called Cole, not me, Cole, which had become the pattern, and in the course of the call, apparently trying to smooth things over, he mentioned that my parents had already spoken to an estate attorney, a man named Gerald Voss in Rockville, about restructuring some things given the uncertainty around grandchildren. Cole didn't understand the significance right away and mentioned it to me almost as an aside. I understood it immediately. My parents had a trust, drafted in 2015, that named their future grandchildren as contingent beneficiaries of a portion of the estate, roughly $180,000 earmarked, split among however many grandchildren existed at the time of my mother's death, meant to help with education costs. If Cole and I never had a biological child, and if my mother had her way, that share would simply be redistributed to Jenna's 2 kids and whatever children Trevor and Priya eventually had. My failure to produce a grandchild wasn't just a disappointment to her. It had a dollar figure attached to it, and she had already started arranging the paperwork. I want to be honest that this is the part where I stopped being only hurt and started being something closer to clear-headed. Hurt makes you want to disappear. Clarity makes you want documentation. I called Dr. Patel's office and requested my full IVF records be released to me, every visit note, every dollar spent, every date, not because I doubted my own experience, but because I had a feeling I was going to need a timeline that couldn't be argued with. I asked Cole to export every voicemail as an audio file and back them up in 2 places, which he'd actually already done, dated and labeled by hand, because apparently some part of him had known back in March that we'd need them eventually. I asked Priya if she'd be willing to put what she told me in writing, and she said yes, without hesitation, and sent me a signed statement 3 days later. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing until I was already dialing. I called a family law attorney, not because I intended to sue my mother, you can't really sue someone for cruelty at a party, but because the estate conversation worried me, and because Jenna, once she heard about the trust restructuring, asked me point blank, do we need to be worried about mom and dad doing something that hurts your legal standing before we even understand what's happening? The attorney, a woman named Sandra Ochoa with an office in downtown Silver Spring, listened to the whole thing, the toast, the voicemails, the trust, the text messages Priya had forwarded, and told me something that stuck with me. None of this is criminal, she said. Your mother is allowed to be unkind, and parents are allowed to restructure their own estate however they want. But you have a right to accurate information, and if there's any implication that your parents are making financial decisions based on false claims about your reproductive choices, that's worth having documented, especially if your father's competency or influence ever becomes a real question later. Right now, this is about you protecting your own peace and your own truth, not about winning a lawsuit. That reframed things for me. I wasn't building a legal case. I was building a record, because I had spent 34 years accepting my mother's version of events, and I was done doing that. 3 weeks after the party, my father called me directly for the first time since that night. He didn't apologize for my mother. He asked if I would come to a family sit-down at their house, because, in his words, your mother wants to clear the air before Labor Day. I told him I would come on one condition: Jenna and Trevor had to be there too, and I wanted it recorded, openly, no hiding it, a condition I stated exactly like that. There was a long pause on the line. Recorded, he repeated. Yes, I said. Because I'm tired of everyone having a different memory of what Mom actually says. He agreed, eventually, though I could hear in his voice that he thought I was overreacting. I wasn't. I was preparing. The family sit-down was set for the Saturday before Labor Day, at my parents' house on Meadowbrook Lane, the same house I'd grown up in. I spent the 4 days before it the way Sandra Ochoa had suggested, not plotting anything dramatic, just organizing. I printed the IVF timeline from Dr. Patel's office, February 3rd, first retrieval, 12 eggs, 8 fertilized. February 24th, first transfer, failed, confirmed by blood work on March 9th, May 30th, second transfer, failed, confirmed June 13th, total cost across both rounds, medications included, $41,600, of which insurance had covered $3,200. I printed Priya's signed statement. I had Cole load the 17 voicemails onto a single flash drive, each one labeled by date, and I made 2 copies, one for me and one I left with Jenna, just in case. I also called Dr. Patel directly, which I hadn't originally planned, and asked her one question: could stress, specifically the kind caused by a hostile family environment, have any documented impact on IVF outcomes? She was careful in her answer, the way good doctors are. She said there's no clean causal proof that stress alone fails a transfer, but she also said, plainly, that patients under chronic relational stress report worse experiences throughout treatment and that she always recommends patients protect their support systems during a cycle. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was context, and I wanted context. The morning of the sit-down, I woke up at 6 a.m. even though the meeting wasn't until 11, and I noticed the smell before anything else, coffee and, faintly, the gardenia hand lotion I still hadn't thrown away, the same scent that had been on the centerpieces the night of the anniversary party. I'd started keeping that bottle on my dresser without really deciding to, and that morning I picked it up, turned it over once, and set it back down. I didn't throw it away. I wasn't ready to, and I told Cole that in the car on the way over, and he just nodded and said, "You don't have to be ready for everything today." We arrived at 10:55. Jenna and Marcus were already there with their kids at a neighbor's house for the afternoon, so it was just Jenna at the table. Trevor and Priya came in behind us. My mother had set out a coffee cake on the same dining table where she'd once told me Jenna would have spelled necessary correctly, and for a second the domesticity of it, the ordinary Saturday cake, almost disarmed me. My father set his phone in the middle of the table, recording, as agreed. My mother sat at the head of the table, the way she had at the country club, and I understood in that moment that she still thought this was her meeting to run. "I want to say," she began, "that I think everyone's overreacting to a comment made in a moment of emotion at a party." "It wasn't a moment," I said. I set Priya's printed statement on the table and slid it toward her. "You texted Priya a draft of that toast 2 weeks early. You tested 2 different phrasings. Manufacture in a lab and buy in a clinic. You picked the one you thought would land harder." My mother's face didn't crumble the way I'd imagined it might in the weeks I'd spent preparing for this. It went tight instead, defensive, the same expression she'd worn my whole childhood right before she reframed something as someone else's fault. "Priya had no right showing you private texts." "I had every right," Priya said, quietly but without flinching. "You asked me to help stage an intervention against your own daughter, Diane. I told you no. You did it anyway." My father's eyes moved to the phone recording on the table, then to my mother, and I watched something shift in his face, not shock exactly, more like a man finally being forced to look directly at something he'd spent 40 years turning away from. I laid out the rest of it in order, the way Sandra had suggested, factually, without raising my voice. The 17 voicemails to Cole, starting in March. The comment about my body telling us something, used twice. The estate conversation with Gerald Voss, the $180,000 in contingent trust funds, the timing of it landing 3 weeks after our second failed transfer. I didn't play the voicemails out loud. I didn't need to. I simply said, "I have them. All 17. Dated. And I have the text drafts of your toast. And I have Priya's statement. I'm not here to sue anyone. I'm here so that the next time you tell this family a version of events where you're the reasonable one, everyone at this table remembers what actually happened." My mother turned to my father, the way she always had, expecting him to step in and say something to soften it, to let it blow over. He didn't. He sat very still for a long moment, then said, "Diane, is this true? The texts to Priya? The lawyer?" "I was trying to protect this family's future," my mother said, and her voice cracked slightly, the first real crack I'd heard in it in years. "Someone had to be practical." "Practical," Jenna repeated, and I heard in her voice the particular fury of an older sibling who'd spent her whole life being the favorite and was only now understanding what that favor had cost the rest of us. "You called your granddaughter's college fund practical while your daughter was still bleeding from a failed transfer." My mother didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in my life, I watched her sit at the head of a table in that house with nothing to say. Trevor, who had said almost nothing until then, finally spoke. "I want to know why you brought Priya into this and not me," he said, and I could tell it wasn't really about being left out, it was the first crack of him seeing his mother the way I'd seen her for years. "Was it because you knew I'd say no faster than she would?" My mother didn't answer that either. She reached for her coffee cup instead, hand slightly unsteady, and I noticed my father watching her hands the way you watch something you're not sure you recognize anymore. "I think," my father said slowly, "we need to talk." Just us. He looked at my mother, then at the phone still recording on the table, and something in his tone had changed, not defensive of her anymore, just tired, and underneath the tired, something that sounded almost like disappointment in himself. We didn't resolve everything that day. I want to be honest about that, because if I told you it all wrapped up neatly around that coffee cake, I'd be lying to you the way my mother had spent months lying about her own motives. What did happen over the following 6 weeks was concrete. My father called Gerald Voss and had the trust language reviewed. It turned out my mother had been more aggressive than even the estate conversation suggested. She'd asked Voss to draft language removing me entirely as a contingent beneficiary unless I produced a biological grandchild by age 36. A clause my father said he'd never agreed to and hadn't known was in the draft until he requested the file himself. He had it struck. The original language, treating all 3 of us equally regardless of how or whether we had children, was restored, and my father had it notarized within the month, this time with both of them signing in front of Voss, together, on the record. My mother agreed, reluctantly at first and then, I think, out of real shame, to attend 6 sessions with a family therapist named Dr. Naomi Reyes in Bethesda, alongside my father. I didn't attend those sessions and don't know everything that was said in them, but my father told me afterward that Dr. Reyes had used the word triangulation to describe what my mother had done with Cole, going around me to control an outcome she couldn't control directly, and that hearing a professional name the pattern out loud had done something my father's 40 years of letting it blow over never had. Socially, the fallout was smaller than I expected, but real. Several of my mother's book club friends had been at the anniversary party, and word travels in a country club social circle faster than anyone admits. My mother wasn't shunned exactly, but she told me once, months later, almost bitterly, that she'd noticed people asking fewer questions about how Renee's doing and more just quietly changing the subject when her name came up, like they already knew something they weren't going to say to her face. She lost, by her own count, 2 close friendships that year, women who'd apparently decided the toast was a bridge too far even by the standards of a social circle that tolerated a lot of quiet cruelty. Cole and I didn't press charges or file anything, because there was, as Sandra had told me from the start, nothing criminal here, just cruelty, documented cruelty, which the law mostly can't touch and mostly shouldn't try to. But documentation did one thing the law couldn't. It made it impossible for my mother to tell a different version of that year to anyone else in the family, ever again, without someone in the room knowing the truth. We started a 3rd IVF round in October, 4 months after the anniversary party, this time with a strict rule Cole and I made together, no updates to my parents, of any kind, until there was something to actually announce. Not we're starting, not we had a retrieval, nothing. My mother asked, once, in November, how things were going, and I told her, we'll let you know when there's news, and she didn't push, which surprised me more than almost anything else that year. The 3rd transfer happened on December 4th. 2 weeks later, on December 18th, the blood work came back positive. I remember sitting in the parking lot of Shady Grove Fertility with Cole, the same kind of parked car silence we'd sat in outside the country club 4 months earlier. Except this time neither of us said anything for almost a full minute because we were both afraid that saying it out loud would somehow undo it. We told my parents on New Year's Eve, over the phone, not in person, because I wasn't ready to give my mother a moment like that again in a room full of people. She cried, and for once I believed the tears were simple, not strategic. My father said, "That's wonderful, Renee," and then, after a pause, "Thank you for telling us." Not finally. Not, "We knew you'd come around." Just "thank you," which was maybe the first time in my adult life he'd said something to me without also managing my mother's feelings in the same breath. I want to tell you the pregnancy was easy after that, but it wasn't, not entirely. I spent the first trimester braced for loss the way you brace for a doorway you've walked into badly before. I still have the gardenia lotion on my dresser. I use it sometimes now, when I want to remember that a smell doesn't have to only mean the worst night of your life, it can just be a smell again, eventually, if you let enough ordinary days pile up on top of the bad one. My daughter, Josephine, was born on August 14th, almost exactly 1 year after that anniversary party. My mother came to the hospital. I let her hold Josephine for 11 minutes, timed not out of pettiness but because I genuinely didn't know, walking in, how long I'd feel comfortable, and 11 minutes turned out to be my honest answer that day. She didn't ask for more. She held the baby, said, "She's beautiful, Renee," and handed her back without a single comment about how long it took or what it cost or what it meant for anyone's trust fund. We're a year and a half out from the anniversary party now. My relationship with my mother is not what it was, and it's also not fully repaired, and I've stopped expecting it to resolve into something clean. Some weeks she calls and it's easy, grandmother and daughter easy, telling me about a recipe or asking about Josephine's daycare. Other times I still hear an edge in her voice that reminds me exactly who I'm talking to, and in those moments I say less, and I let the conversation end sooner than I might have a few years ago. My father, oddly, is the one who's changed the most. He calls me now, just to talk, something he almost never did before that Saturday at the dining table. I think watching himself finally say something out loud cost him something, and he's been trying, in his quiet way, to make up for 30-plus years of letting things blow over instead. Jenna and I are closer than we've ever been. Trevor and Priya come to more family dinners now, and Priya and I talk on the phone sometimes about nothing in particular, which feels like its own kind of repair, considering where all of this started. I think about that toast sometimes, still, usually when I catch the smell of gardenias somewhere unexpected, a candle in a store, a neighbor's garden in June. I used to think forgiveness meant going back to how things were. I don't think that anymore. I think forgiveness is something you can offer honestly and still keep a locked door behind it. My mother is welcome at birthdays, at holidays, in Josephine's life as her grandmother. But she doesn't get unsupervised time alone with my daughter, not yet, maybe not for a long while, and she's never once complained about that boundary out loud, which I think is its own kind of apology, even if she'll never say the words directly. Forgiveness is personal. Access has to be earned back, one ordinary, uneventful visit at a time. I still don't have a clean answer for how I feel about Cole keeping those voicemails from me for those 5 months. Most days I understand it completely, he was trying to protect me during the worst stretch of my life. Some days, a smaller part of me still wishes he'd told me sooner, that I'd had those months to see it clearly instead of finding out all at once in a parking lot. I don't think that contradiction ever fully resolves. I've stopped expecting it to. So I'll ask you what I've had to ask myself more than once this past year. If the people who were supposed to protect you turned out to be the ones keeping score against you the whole time, would you have known how to look for the receipts? Or would you have kept believing the version of the story they were telling everyone else? Thank you so much for watching. I want to be completely clear with you, everything in this video is fictional, written for entertainment and reflection only, and any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. If there's one thing I hope you take from Renee's story, it's this: healing rarely arrives as one dramatic confrontation, it arrives in the small, unglamorous decision to keep setting the same boundary, calmly, again and again, until the people around you finally believe you mean it.